Hey guys, thanks for joining me here on the Come Reason podcast. I just wanted to let you know that if you enjoy these shows, you can gain access to a lot of additional content by becoming a Come Reason Defender. With your tax-deductible gift of $25 a month, you'll be able to view exclusive videos, debates, and presentations, even by top scholars such as Dr. J.P. Moreland, Sean McDowell, J. Warner Wallace, Dr. Hugh Ross, and many, many more. Plus, our Defenders Library provides PowerPoint presentations and notes used to develop these podcasts. So check it out by logging on to the comereason.org/defenders page on the website and see all the benefits your support provides. And thank you for supporting Come Reason Ministries. Richard Dawkins is arguably the world's most famous atheist, yet on Easter Sunday in 2024, he claimed to be a cultural Christian during a television interview. Why would the man who paid for bus advertisements dismissing God want to be identified as a Christian? Hi everyone, this is Lenny Esposito, and this week I'm back at the radio show with the apologetics.com guys to discuss how various unbelievers like Richard Dawkins, Sam Rubin, Douglas Murray, Tom Holland, and others are now claiming and identifying as cultural Christians. Now Dawkins is clear that he likes the benefit of living in a Christian society, but that's the rub. You see, for any society to sustain the fruits of Christianity, well, there needs to be a strong root of true believers in Jesus. But that was just what Dawkins and others tried to help prune away. So, how do we reconcile these things? And how do we understand the movement as it's happening now? There's a lot to be seen on this. Come, let us reason together.
Welcome to the apologetics.com radio show where we challenge believers to think and thinkers to believe. I'm Harry Edwards, your host for the evening. Our topic for tonight is about an article that William Dembski wrote on May 1st titled, Dawkins, the New Cultural Christian. So tonight we want to talk about that article and its contents and what in the world is a cultural Christian, at least in the context of Richard Dawkins. Now, for some of you, you know that Richard Dawkins is probably the world's most famous atheist. He kind of made atheism cool. He made this saying kind of like popular, plastered all over London on London buses, and it goes something like this: there's probably no God. Now stop worrying and enjoy your life. So there was an interview not too long ago where he confessed. Now, this is an ardent atheist, right? Where he wrote a book about Christianity being, you're delusional if you believe in such things.
God delusion, yeah.
The God delusion, right. But apparently, he's sort of softened his heart a little bit to this and now considers himself a cultural Christian. He actually mentioned those two words together, that he identifies as a cultural Christian. So tonight we want to talk about that, and we titled this show Parasitic Christianity, and we came up with a cool subtext. Lenny did. Lenny, what's the subtext?
How Dawkins' atheism can't exist without Jesus.
There you go. I love it. So tonight I am honored to have my regular guests tonight, and we're going to be talking about it, Dr. Jacob Daniel and Lenny Esposito. How are you guys doing?
Doing good, yeah. Just I need to especially thank apologetics.com radio show for the past 12 years. It's been preparing me to stay awake at night.
That's right.
And
that's right.
You're welcome.
welcome. So the context, I'm so grateful to the Lord for giving us, my wife and I, a beautiful daughter who was born early this month after 15 long years of longing, waiting, and desiring.
Yeah.
Absolute miracle. And she chooses to keep us awake at night sometimes. Sometimes she sleeps well. So I'm grateful, absolutely.
And I'm glad you're here, even though it's probably your turn to take care of the baby right now.
It's joy.
Well, what's going on with you, Lenny?
Well, I just got back from a 2-week tour of Europe, walking in the footsteps of the apostles, where we visited some of the different churches mentioned both in the book of Acts and in the book of Revelation. So we went through Paul's travels, right? And we also saw Pergamum and Smyrna and those areas, saw Ephesus, saw Corinth, and actually ended up in Athens, then Rome. Just a great time understanding and engaging in the book of Acts and what Peter, Paul, what John was experiencing, and how that actually played out in the real world, which was really
Did you guys
exciting.
get to visit the 7 churches mentioned in
Well, half of the 7.
Oh, okay.
So we didn't do Thyatira. We didn't. There were a couple. We did do Laodicea, and that was interesting as well. So there was, but.
And it's interesting. It would connect to our topic today. Imagine what would happen if Islam would have the inroads in Europe.
Exactly.
Just the way it has
Because those were that was central to Christianity.
Yeah.
Visited Patmos as well, which was kind of fascinating. I tell people Patmos that it isn't the end of the world, but you can see it from there.
It didn't seem like it was the end of the world from there.
No, well, obviously John saw the end of the world, so from there. So
that's right. There's nothing out there after.
But it was a great trip, and we're planning on doing more. So.
Well, we are listener supported, so just a reminder to all of you, thank you for your support and continue to pray for us, and we appreciate your tax-deductible gifts. Like us on Facebook, like us or subscribe on our YouTube channel, which this show will be on YouTube in a week from now. So you can see our faces, and if we recommend books, we'll hold it up even, right? And if you want to join in, participate in our conversation this evening, give us a call at 888-995-KKLA. That's 888-995-5552. So we are talking about Richard Dawkins and his new found religion. I'm going to call that cultural.
Quite a statement, because he doesn't quite go that far.
He doesn't, but it is now.
It's interesting. This all spurs from an interview that he was doing on British television. I think the show is called Leading Britain's Conversation, LBC. And it was on Easter Sunday of this year. So back in March, on Easter Sunday, he was interviewed by Rachel Johnson, I believe her name is, and she was asking what some of his concerns were, and one of his concerns was the rapid influx of Islam into the United Kingdom and how that is reshaping the culture of Britain in its formative areas. And he said that he made the claim, I am a cultural Christian. I like Christmas. I like the carols. I like to hear the church bells, things of that nature. And that a discussion ensued upon that. And then, of course, that spurred folks like William Dembski to write an article asking, wait a minute, isn't this the Dawkins? The same Dawkins who wrote at the beginning of the God Delusion that God is of the Old Testament is the most maniacal, evil, most malevolent, most misogynistic figure to ever grace the pages of any point of literature.
Right.
So what's going on here?
He even said if that God exists, he wouldn't want to know that God, right?
Yes,
Something like that.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And the flow remains, right? It's the same flow. If there's no God, how could you arrive at any moral standard, which there's so much appeal to time and again? I think I would put it this way, Harry. It's Dawkins' attempt to reform atheism on the foundations of Christianity. That's what it is. There is this nostalgia. I've lived in England. I was Dawkins' neighbor.
That's
on
right.
the same street.
Yeah, tell us about that. Yeah.
So I would see him go on walks with his dog and sometimes with his wife, and I would see him almost every other day, and had an interaction with him about his book as well once. And nice guy when you see and talk to him, and would pray for him. And I'm very confident that God's working in his heart, even through these means. So at the end, I would say that we should pray for him, and may the Holy Spirit work and bring him out of that blindness.
And like I said a while ago, it's a step in the right direction.
Yes.
Right? So definitely softened his heart a little bit, because he sees the alternative and it's not looking very good.
And for us Christians, it's again a good pointer to the fact that culture matters. What shapes culture matters. The outcome of culture matters. And it not only impacts the church and people in the church, but also those who are our neighbors. One way to love our neighbors is to really bring our worldview to inform the culture we live in.
Yeah, no, that's good. So what do you think Dawkins means when he says he is now a cultural Christian? What do you think he means by that?
I think we got to be a little careful, because he's made this statement in the past. This is not something revelatory to just this year. You can go back as far as 2007 and finding him saying such things. But what he means is that he finds the general values of the Christian West something with which he's comfortable, and reflecting in a broad sense some of his own understanding of the values of society, because he at least recognizes the fact that in the West there are things like the worth of all people being created equal, that there's a plurality in the world, and we should let all different aspects of that plurality have at least some voice and out there, or the equality of women, things of this nature. Now, Dawkins will immediately shut down any religious assertions, or he won't allow. He will immediately debunk or try to debunk things like the virgin birth. And in this interview, that's what he does. He actually even corners the interviewer and says, well, you don't believe in the virgin birth, do you? You don't believe. And she says, well, she mentions that she was at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre 2 weeks ago. And she said, there is an essence there. There's a way that it just exudes Christianity in that place. And he goes, yeah, but you don't really believe Jesus rose from the dead, do you? So here's the tension in this. When Dawkins talks about these things in an abstraction, when in 2006, when he's publishing The God Delusion, and there's not the influx of Islam, when he's comfortable within his Christian culture, then he can speak against Christianity with ease. And he did so in other interviews and in other places. He makes Christianity and Islam to be basically equally, not merely fallacious, but equally evil. The root, right? He replaces the idea money is the root of all evil. He replaces that with religion is really the root of all evil. He agrees with Christopher Hitchens that religion poisons everything. They're all waving these flags. And then what happens is the culture starts to change around him with something other than the Christian culture. And now he says, wait a minute, I think I'd rather have the Christian culture than what it's morphing into.
Right.
There is distinctions between, and he makes that point again in the article, in the interview. He says, of the two, I'd rather live in a Christian culture than an Islamic culture, because Islamic cultures hold to values that I don't hold to. They hold to stoning homosexuals, for example. They hold to the abuse of women, the veiling of women, the subjugation of women. There are other issues that Islam has that would be an affront to me. So when he's saying I'm a cultural Christian, that's what he's saying.
Right.
But the problem is he wants the icing on the cake without having to bake anything.
And I would add to that is that interesting fact is that he was not appealing to cultural atheism. He didn't say that, okay, I long for cultural atheism. The fact remains that if you've traveled around the world, you've seen cultures, you've seen one of the unique aspect of our Christian faith is that, and what is allowed in the world is that it's a culture-making worldview.
Yes.
Fundamentally. If you look at other worldviews, including atheism, it is culture-consuming worldviews. And that's the fundamental difference. I think, therefore, Dawkins do feel that nostalgia of being raised in that kind of culture where he's been in the midst of that culture-making that Christianity provided. And he even was willing to complain about it when he was in that kind of context.
Yeah.
But now when the inroads of Islam and other religions and other cultures are coming in, I think he's feeling
he's
the challenges.
experiencing,
Yes.
and how that kind of worldview is not tenable.
Yes.
It's not livable.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about that before. That's like a famous Ronald Nash thing, when we test
Right.
worldviews. Can you live it?
Yeah.
Right? You may like it, you may think intellectually it makes sense, but is it livable?
But he's appealing to something that a lot of people do, and I think we should be attacking this as cultural apologists. We should be doing is that this mood of somehow you can belong without believing. And that's
the problem.
That's the problem. And I think we should be saying that you can't rightfully belong without believing. And this is what we have to offer.
So if we had like a sit down, the three of us, with Professor Dawkins, what would you tell him about his cultural Christianity? What would you ask him?
I would say it's not that he's ignorant of what Christianity has offered. I think what is needed is for him to be, as a Christian, I would say God has to really regenerate his heart to really see the light and commit to it. That as Christians, we are supposed to pray for him, and also not at the expense of offering an argument that he may have. And he's not been a good philosopher. He's not been someone who has studied theology. He is a biologist who argues, and he is not a good philosopher. If you ask any philosopher, his arguments aren't that credible. But what's happening is that he needs to humble himself and commit to the truth. And the issue here is the idea of commitment that he's not able to make, in my opinion. At the same time, I think where he is more proximate to the truth than he was 10 years ago. So thanks to these challenges that he is experiencing in culture and seeing in culture, may God use that to draw his heart to himself.
Yeah, the big problem that I see is, and I'm going to use kind of a biblical allusion, is he wants the fruit without the root. He wants the grapes without the vine. Mm-hmm. And Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches. With the good that Christians do and the ideas that Christians propagate that ground individual liberty have their roots in a belief system that centers on the fact that Jesus really did live, that he really did die for our sins, and that he really rose again. If that doesn't happen, then why would Christians scoop babies up off the Tiber River who were abandoned by Romans because they were, quote, defective, unquote? Why would Christians risk their lives and risk their ability to eat to feed perfect strangers? That makes no sense otherwise. There is a moral compunction that drives these things. And this has been tried before. So one of the points that Jacob makes is correct. The reason why there is no atheist civilization, and there ever has been, is because there's nothing to ground their collective atheism. You can't rally around what you don't believe. Right? If there's where do you draw your common moral framework from? Where do you understand what's good and what's right if there's no ultimate transcendent value from which to grow? There was a movement in the UK, and it started spreading across the US, where several atheists noticed how lonely they were getting and how isolated they were getting from one another because they used to have fulfillment within, say, church services. And these church services actually did more than just gave them a place to go on Sunday mornings. It gave them meaning. It gave them friendships. It bonded them together for ministry opportunities, for missions work, for common causes. And they said, well, maybe we can do this ourselves. And they created this thing called the Sunday Assembly. And it started off in London and several other places. And New York opened a chapter, LA opened a chapter, all of these things started to happen where you could get together and they can, have your art and have
They sang songs too.
And kind of mimic church without the
Christ.
church.
Yeah.
The problem was people were like, well, I think I'd rather play golf. I think I'd rather sleep in. I think I'd rather, and they all fall apart.
Yeah.
They all fell apart. Why? Because you can't fake it without the motivation, without the central reality of a Jesus changing your heart, motivating your mind, motivating your actions. And that's the problem is you can't have a Christian culture without Christ. It just won't work.
And a question that I would ask if we get to actually meet with him is to, or maybe I will motivate him if I can, is to look beyond the questions of what and how, because that's the world he lives in, his academic world and what he does, and onto the question of why, and why revelation is a credible source of truth and where it comes from. So that would be a question I would really ask him to spend time in and find the truth in the person of Jesus Christ.
See, I would even ask him, like in all of his personal experience and in all our human experiences, when we see a result, we're always curious about the cause. When we see effects, we're typically curious about what caused the effects. And so when I was thinking about this article in Dawkins claiming to be a cultural Christian, I have this thing that I imagine that he might. It's like the same thing as appreciating a supercar, but not appreciating what makes it a supercar, like under the hood. And it's almost like maybe at some point that supercar's engine got maybe replaced by a lawnmower now, but he's sitting in this nice supercar and it can't figure out why it's not traveling fast anymore. It's not, having supercar properties. And I think in some sense, that's what he's missing. He's realizing the culture and the world around him is changing, but now he's claiming something from his past, and he can't quite attain it.
And biblically speaking, we need to understand that when we talk about covenant, there are those in the covenant and there are those who enjoy the provisions of the covenant. Not everyone who is in Israel is an Israelite, right? That's the point. So here in culture, what we do is that a lot of people who enjoy what Christianity has to offer, but what we are doing is that making an appeal that you will reconcile with your maker, who is the source of the good that we see in culture, and get in covenant with him. And Richard Dawkins, I pray and I believe that one day God will draw his heart to that very covenant that he should be part of.
Yeah. So a while ago during the break, we mentioned Dawkins might be similar to what's going on with Jordan Peterson.
Yes.
He knows all of the right things. I feel like in the deepest recesses of his heart, he wants Christianity to be true, and he, in some ways, wants to submit to it, but he can't quite do it, or there's something
He definitely has
missing.
a nostalgia for the England of his childhood. He definitely has a nostalgia, like I said, for the carols, for the deep
cultural
traditions.
capital.
Right. Yeah. Specifically, those carols are all 100% Christian based.
So, Christmas. He wants there to be Christmas. He wants that kind of celebration to happen. He doesn't want it replaced with Ramadan, for example. He resonates with the idea of peace on earth, goodwill toward men, as opposed to submission. Right. And so there's these kinds of issues, but again, it's like being a wine connoisseur and complaining that the hills are covered with vineyards. You just can't wipe out the vineyards and expect that the wine is still going to be any good. Right. It just doesn't work that way. And there's only limited choices. This is the third piece. Yeah. It's not like there's any combination of these things. Like we say, these worldviews, they have to be livable. They have to work in a much broader context. The reason why every communistic society that's ever been tried has failed is because communism itself doesn't work. And people say, well, real communism has never been tried. No, you can't even get close to getting real communism tried, because human nature is such that people will say, it's not going to be each one works according to his desire and each one gets according to his need. That'll never work.
Right.
People will always want to be lazy and you go ahead and work and give to me.
And then once it's forced, that's not going to be a fun system anymore.
Right. and then what happens is what we see with DEI and everything else, it all boils down to the lowest common denominator. It's never the ones who reach higher, because the ones who reach higher get knocked down because they have more than anyone else.
I also wonder how much of his friend's conversion, Ayan Hirsi Ali, who converted to Christianity, again, cultural Christianity in one sense, that's how it looks like, has impacted him. I think definitely that was a shock for him when he actually said that he needs to rethink and learn much about.
Oh, he did say that.
He did say that.
So he's going to have to go back to history and figure things out, because obviously he is unfamiliar with the results that Christianity has brought, the positive things that is based on Christianity. And we were talking about even this Oxford fellow, Larry Steintop, and which is a book we would all recommend. What's the title of the book?
So he wrote a book called Inventing the Individual, and that talks about how the West and the rise of the idea of the worth of the person comes out of a Christian worldview. And Seidentop notes that in previous societies like Rome or Sparta, or you were a Roman citizen, and that was ultimate, and then everybody else was just fodder in order to support Roman citizenry. Right? It was Rome that was the important thing. So if you don't worship Caesar, for example, you are undermining civilization. You are undermining Rome. And that was why the crime of Christianity was punishable by death, because you wouldn't support the emperor, not because you believed in Jesus per se, but because you believed Jesus exclusively. And he notes that it was, first it was family, and family grew into societies, but in Christianity, you had the individual replacing the family as the focus of immortality. Therefore, if God created humans as equal, as rational agents with free will, then there ought to be an area within which they are free to choose and be responsible for their own free choices. And so now we have a difference, a fundamental aspect of the individual who carries his own worth, regardless of whether he's a citizen of the polis or not.
Yeah. Right. In fact, I think, didn't he call the rise of Christianity like a moral revolution? Because it was totally new. It was
completely backwards. Well, he writes here, identifying such an area was at first meant to be self-defense by Christians, but soon it was also much more than that. Tertullian saw clear implications of Christian moral beliefs. Here lies the perfection and distinctiveness of Christian goodness. Ordinary goodness is different, for all men love their friends, but he says only Christians love their enemies. Fundamentally different than any other aspect and any other faith system that had existed before or since.
So we'll definitely talk more about his ideas on the second half hour of our show. I know we're coming up on a station break, and we have been talking about Bill Dembski's article, Dawkins, the New Cultural Christian, what it means, what Dawkins think it means to be a cultural Christian, and what is really behind all of that. So we will continue this right after the break. Well, welcome back to the second half hour of the apologetics.com radio show, where we challenge believers to think and thinkers to believe. Our topic for tonight is about an article that Dr. William Dembski wrote, titled, he wrote it in May, so it's just a few weeks old. Title is Dawkins, the New Cultural Christian, and it's an admission by Richard Dawkins, the famous atheist, that he is now a cultural Christian. So during the break, I just came up with this term called the Dawkins dilemma. He probably might not appreciate it, but he needs to be clear on this, because on the one hand, he loves the fruits of Christianity, and then on the other hand, he rejects Christianity. So you can't have it both ways, and he's going to have to struggle with that, don't you think? I mean, that must plague him deeply. I don't know, because the world is definitely closing in on him. You know, it's all around him, and at some point he needs to be consistent with his beliefs and behavior. So we were talking about some of the ideas from Dr. Larry Seidentop. There you go, Seidentop, on Oxford Dawn, and he's done a lot of research on. Pretty much, he says, without question, that the West would not be the West without Christianity. There would be no such thing. And maybe to our listeners and to you, that's not a surprise, but in our current secular thinking, they always rail against those kinds of things. You know, they don't want any kind of religion in secular society. But one cannot deny the fact that it's Christianity that has built all of these things that we enjoy. In fact, there's an atheist by the name of Steven Pinker. He's a Harvard professor. And he wrote a book not too long ago where he looks at all of the indices of human flourishing, like wealth, like apparently wealth globally is increasing, inequality is decreasing, wars among superpowers have been pretty much has dipped to nothing. In fact, apparently it's called the long peace since World War II. So there are many aspects of life around the world, like poverty has gone down.
Life expectancy, education,
exactly.
Health.
All of those have gone up. And we can't deny all of those things. And yet it's actually generated by the West, right? He does give reasons. He has reasons for why those things are up. They're not adequate. Maybe it's going to be for another show. And just briefly, he thinks it's reason, like the Enlightenment has contributed to it, science and humanism. We know those three things really fail.
I would add this, Harry. The basic reason for that is that a lot of cultures, people from other cultures would claim that we had that in our culture. So the major difference that Christian worldview made was making it universal for all people, grounded on the foundation. I call this Christian cultural preamble, that we all are created equal. We have the image of God, not just me, but also my neighbor, who I may agree or disagree with, has that image on them. So the major difference that the Christian worldview done was this idea of universalizing education, universalizing health. So I always ask this question: when was the last time you heard about an Islamic relief agency that reaches out to not only Muslims but also to Christians and non-believers or whoever it may be? You can't name one. There are many who reaches out to Muslim world. It's likewise for Hindus. So you don't find a lot of those things, but there are Christian agencies reaching out to people whether they believe or they don't believe, because we hold to this idea that we need to value the fact that they all are created in the image of God and respect that.
Well, I mean, I'm just reminded of our current Middle East crisis right now. How many countries have accepted these Hamas refugees or West Bank refugees? How many?
Right.
Zero.
None of the
neighboring countries.
They won't do it. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of protests, a lot of noises out there.
Still tribalism going on.
But they're not gonna get those guys into their border. In fact, as soon as that happened, Egypt closed their borders immediately.
And part of the reason is because they understand that they're radicalized.
That's right.
And they would undercut the very governments of the nations to which they're fleeing,
right,
which becomes part of the issue. So you see, listeners out there, if you're listening to apologetics.com, you even can understand world events just by knowing how cultures move around the world and how certain ideas, and they have their consequences, and it's just not livable, right? It's interesting that when you look at the cultural choices that we have, we aren't talking about quite a a few. We're talking about actually some fairly limited choices. So first thing is basis of societies and understanding general morality. There's pretty much three types of cultural points that you can use. There's the culture that's basically power and weakness, right? Power assertion. So basically might makes right. Whoever has the biggest stick, he's the ruler and he makes the laws, the king kind of thing. There's also then the honor shame culture, which is the default for more active or more developed societies where there's a lot of more complexity within the society itself. There's a general understanding of honor that you don't broach. So for the Japanese, honor is success and things like that. And if you behave dishonorably, maybe you have to cut off a finger or something like that in order to regain honor for your family. In Islamic societies, you may lose honor because as a female, you were either sexually promiscuous or possibly even raped, but you still bring shame onto your family, and you have to restore that honor in some way, shape, or form. You have and that's a pretty big default. Christian nations, because of the image of God, we are a guilt innocence society where the guilt of the individual is based on the deeds of the individual. That doesn't carry through to their children or to their parents. It doesn't reflect per se on them. You can understand, hey, well, if you're, if your kid becomes a drug addict, that's not necessarily an impeachment upon you, and won't stop you from getting a job or having your name run through the mud kind of thing. So those are very, very limited. And what you see is when you abandon the Christianity, then you tend to fall back on one of these honor shame type power structures, and that. We see it with cancel culture, for example, that kind of thing. It just becomes, it doesn't become what's true, it becomes what's honorable. Mm-hmm. And again, what other choices are there then?
Yeah. So what has fundamentally happened is that Christianity has moved many societies around the world, and at least through the forming of nations, starting with United Nations here, from a purely duty-based society to right-based societies, built on, again, it's not at the expense of duties, but right takes precedence. So
that's the Magna Carta, right?
Exactly.
That's the start of it. So.
Because recognizing the dignity of the individual being intrinsic, not acquired. If you have to acquire dignity, you have to perform duty and be qualified by the collective. So if you don't, if you bring shame to the collective, you're excommunicated. That's the cancel culture.
Now, what happens in a culture like India, where you have a caste system, where it doesn't matter what you do, you can't ever get honor outside of your caste,
because you're stuck for many lives. It has eternal consequences. So if Dawkins have to choose, he may not even choose Hinduism, because it would actually get him stuck in a system, in a locale that he can't actually move out of or exit from.
So let's put it this way. During the break, I challenged you guys. Let's imagine that Richard Dawkins is faced with this, what I'm calling the Dawkins dilemma, right? So he seeks to be consistent with his worldview, his thinking. He wants his beliefs and behavior to match. So he's shopping around for a worldview. What do you think, as he is window shopping, he passes by Islam? We know he rejects that. Well, he might pass by maybe Buddhism or Hinduism or maybe where he's at right now, secularism. What are some of the issues he's going to face as he tries to consider those worldviews?
Let me say this from what is obvious and from his own personal experience. Could Dawkins be Dawkins anywhere else other than in a university like Oxford that has a motto that Lord is my light?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question.
Right? That's a good question. And I think we should be asking this question. And so I think he can't do what he's doing in Saudi Arabia.
Right.
He can't do what he's doing in Nepal or Bhutan or India. Right. He can only do where he is doing, that is at, Oxford University.
A place that grants him freedom.
And started as a seminary.
Yeah.
And promoted the fact that there is order in the universe, that we can learn and understand and glorify God with that and spread the light.
Right.
So for example, Dawkins is window shopping and he passes a store with Sparta, right? What's the goal of Sparta? Well, come back with your shield or come back upon your shield, right? Are you fighting for the collective? And if you're not fighting, if you're a child born with crippled feet, guess what you do? You get tossed over the rocks, right? Everybody remembers that opening scene from the 300. Yeah, that's real.
Yeah.
And infanticide was universally practiced. Okay, maybe Sparta's not good. Well, why don't we go to, say, Japan? How did the ancient Japanese live? Well, they lived under a feudal system for most part, where the emperor was the rule. And even though there was a Buddhist underlying philosophy, that Buddhism is self-serving. It's all about looking within. It's never about looking without.
And find me a Buddhist scientist who has done much good for the world.
Yeah, if you look at, matter of fact, even
who really is a Buddhist.
Nobel Peace Prize winners, you see, it's overwhelmingly from Christian nations.
Right. The reason, if he truly adheres to the Buddhist idea, he is supposed to do nothing.
Yes.
Because the idea of reincarnation and the cyclic view of the world.
Right. So can he tolerate Buddhism? Right.
Yeah. No.
No, I don't think he can tolerate the Buddhist logic. That would drive him
His world doesn't
nuts.
exist in Buddhism.
Yeah.
His world doesn't exist in Islam, as he claims. I mean, from this whole argument. And it doesn't exist in Hinduism.
Right.
And he never claimed to actually cultural atheism. The only thing that he claimed was cultural Christianity. And I think he's right on it. Because Christianity is the one that can offer the world that he can actually flourish in.
Right. So let's turn the tables for Dawkins right here. So let's say, Dawkins, you really were comfortable in, you're saying it now that you're a cultural Christian, but you really are a naturalist, right? So maybe we turn the tables and go, why don't you inspect your naturalistic worldview? And we know that you are a naturalist, but now you're saying you're a cultural Christian. There's a big divide right there, you know. Now he's liking Christmas carols, and so now he needs to understand what, and we kind of alluded to this in the very beginning, what is in worldviews, what are things in worldviews that actually create good culture?
Right. Because here's the problem with naturalism. If you truly believe naturalism deep down, if you truly are... the idea that the material is primary, that takes precedence.
It's the only thing that exists. Right?
Well, naturalism is not quite that specific. Materialism is that specific. Naturalism can believe that there are things like consciousness or mind, but those are epiphenomenal, right? They come.
They're material.
They come out of material. They may not be material. There's a quibble on that. But even so, material is still, and science is primary. Then what happens is you understand that there is no transcendent order. There's merely survival of the fittest. Nature is red in tooth and claw.
Right.
If the evolutionary worldview is true. So what binds people to one another? Nothing. It's competitive by nature. So either you lapse into a very Nietzschean idea of power in order to advance your own desires. It becomes selfish. And again, it disjoints society as opposed to uniting society. There's nothing to make me want to help my brother or have any self-sacrifice or anything like that. You have something different going on. And that's why you never see an atheist society come up in the past or even in the present. The communist societies that tried to replace their Sunday message with their political lessons quickly failed, quickly devolved. And that was a really a big difference. So naturalism by itself would breed anarchy, ultimately. It would be individualistic, it would be selfish, and it would be anarchy. It wouldn't be a society anymore. It would be warring
looking for
factions.
new power arrangements. Yeah.
Right.
And ultimately, those new power arrangements, what will happen is they will shake down by family structure, because the things that you would care about would be your family. And then you start the whole polis process over again, which is how Rome, and so it auto selects itself back to what we saw in the beginning, which is all of these the Rome, the Greece, the Sparta. Interesting, Seidentop talks about this as well. One of the things that he notes is that Christianity made a huge difference in Rome through its martyrdom of Christians. And he writes this is a great quote. He says, first of all, he notes that the very public deaths of the martyrs were the epitome of selflessness to the underclass, to the slaves, to the vast majority of people who are suffering to serve the citizenry of Rome, right? And he writes, in making martyrs of Christian, the ancient world was consecrating what it sought to destroy and destroying what it sought to preserve. For Christian martyrs gained a hold over the popular imagination. And it was easy to see why that should have been so. The martyrs offered a model of heroism. As Tertullian remarked early in the 3rd century, the martyr's blood provided the seed of the church. Mm-hmm. So Seidentop summarized that the cult of the martyrs began to redefine what it meant to be a hero. No longer is it Odysseus on his quest who's already in control. He's already aristocracy and he's bettering himself. Self-sacrifice became the standard.
Or maybe not the gladiators too.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not building up more for me. It's losing myself for the sake of the other. And that became the standard. And again, that doesn't happen without the resurrection, because you need Jesus' model of self-sacrifice. So a guy like Polycarp can say, I would lay down my life. How can I do less for my Lord who laid down his life for me?
And it's interesting, in a few blocks from where Dawkins lives is Martyrs Memorial, right in the center of Oxford.
Oh, yeah.
That's a constant reminder, I believe, every time he walks to his university that this is the case. If he's listening, maybe he should consider that. What I would also say is that, anyone who is longing or is benefiting from the fruits of Christianity, what they're actually looking for is a God who pronounces good in creation. And there is only one who does that. And is capable to do that, is the God of the Bible. Mm-hmm. When he creates everything, he calls it good. And when he creates man, who he wants to be culture makers, he calls them very good. Very good. Yeah. And I think that's the world we need. And Christ restores that, where he teaches us to, seek his kingdom, his values to be brought down here on earth as it is in heaven.
And Scripture is just filled with those kinds of things that commands us and encourages us to be fruitful and multiply, to subdue, fill the earth, all of that. And then even in the New Testament, we have the command to go. Yeah. To go. In fact, I can't think of any other worldview or religion apart actually from Islam, except they do it by the sword, where we actually have to go and expand God's kingdom. It's all about proselytizing. Right. It's all about bringing heaven to earth. How is earth to be? Well, like heaven, as the Lord models that prayer for us.
And it's a historical fact and something beautiful that the Scripture talks about. Christ came at the right time in history. Yeah. It wasn't an accident that he came one day. And for the reason is this, that right before the Romans, the general attitude of any emperor or ruler who would go and invade a place would be to decimate that place, bring all the goods back to their own country.
Right.
Except for the Romans. They would go out and establish a Roman colony.
Yes.
They were the first one to do that. And that was the right time for Christ to actually say that God's kingdom is not one of us actually aspiring to actually escape from here, not care for the world that he's given us for another land, but take care of what he's given us here, that meek shall inherit the earth, that his kingdom come, his will be done on earth as it is in heaven, because all authority in heaven and on earth is given to him, right? And therefore we go, make disciples of all nations.
Now, I know in the article, if one were to read it, the sense I got was Bill Dembski's saying, let's not give all of the credit to Richard Dawkins in terms of how the West has increasingly become, I don't want to say
its Christian ethos.
Yeah.
Let's say that.
But so yes, he made atheism popular, but that was just more like pop rather than real. If you were to read social media, you'd think that half of the world is atheist, but it's really a small percentage. But see, that's the success of marketing and all of those kinds of things. And we have to keep that in mind, that atheism is a small percentage. It's probably maybe 2% of the world, 2 or 3% of the world, and yet they have this clout. So in the article, Bill Dembski is sort of downplaying the atheist's role in making our society more secular. So he actually blames an institution. Can you guys guess which institution he blames for part of this? I'm going to call evangelical drift. He puts the blame on the church.
The church not doing its job.
Yeah. So he lists many ways in which the church has failed, and it might be good to just mention some of them. He talks about the church having a ghetto mentality. There's maybe an adoption of scientific materialism. That's not a surprise, right? How about misguided views of Scripture? Of all of these, he lists 7, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the things that jump out at you guys?
In all of this, one of the things he points out is we as the church aren't doing a good enough job in educating our congregations in each of these aspects. That Christianity was never meant to have a holy huddle. That's, I understand the initial reaction of, I keep pushing against this and I keep getting stung, so I withdraw. But that's part of being a Christian, is knowing that, they hated me before they hate you, yeah. Right? And a servant is not greater than his master. This is part of the job description, so that's something that we have to understand, and that, again, that we can rejoice even in our sufferings of being hated because we know that we're doing the Lord's work. How do we counter scientific materialism? Do we see it, or do we sometimes assume it, even in our own schools or in our own workplaces? How do we understand the outworkings of that? One of the things that he said here that was really interesting is the fact that he noted, Philip Johnson said this as well, that Christians have to work twice as hard as everybody else. And he said, when he was studying, right, it's not enough that you go to school, you learn evolution, that everybody would teach that, and that's would be accepted. Well, with us, we not only have to learn evolution, we got to learn the reasons why that's not true. And if we're doing our job right, we better learn both well. And you have to learn poor theology and understand it so that you can learn good theology in order to be able to answer it. You got to do twice the work. Yeah. And that's a piece. And are we devaluing education? Is it, I just want to love Jesus. I don't need all this head knowledge stuff. Aren't we being just as emotive as the people that were pointing to and saying, you're letting your feelings run the show? So there's all of these aspects that we've become lazy in the church, and I think he does have a point that we can make a much bigger difference if we try to focus ourselves in these contexts.
Well, in the remaining minutes that we have, gentlemen, how can we use this admission by Richard Dawkins that he is now a cultural Christian? How can we use that to our advantage as we do the work of cultural apologetics? Does this help our cause or hurt our cause, or how can we use this to our advantage?
I would say there are 4 things I talk about always, that as Christians we should be good in analyzing where we are in culture. The next thing that we should be doing is that be good in advocating what is it that we have to propose in light of what we have analyzed, and then actualize, create culture, involve, redeem the pre-political institutions, one of which is teaching or education, learning. And lastly, I would say what we need to do, and we always fail to do this, is amplify. We do not amplify the good that Christianity has done. Why aren't the churches coming together and saying that Christ has made difference, not just individually for our lives, but for the world as well? Come and join us and be part of his family.
The sciences, all of the education.
Well, and even these ideas of heroism, how they are dramatically different today than they would have been in any other cultural context. You know, if you enjoy things like superhero movies, you have to realize that that's based on a Christian, specifically a Christian understanding of salvation.
And an important thing to also remember is that cultures do not redeem, but we need to redeem our cultures, and Christ does that.
Ultimately, in The Abolition of Man, C.S. Lewis had noted these things, and I think it's worth repeating again, where he says that, you know, in a sort of ghastly simplicity, we remove the organ and demand the function. We make men without chests and expect of them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst. We castrate and bid the geldings to be fruitful. And I think that's what Dawkins is doing. And I think if we were to underscore that and amplify that, it would give people pause.
Well, Lenny, you had the last word. That's a great way to end our show. So you've been listening to apologetics.com radio, where we challenge believers to think and thinkers to believe. Our hope is that you've learned some aspect about the Christian worldview that strengthens your faith and make you want to learn more. Special thanks to my panel, Jacob and Lenny, to our valiant engineer back there, Brandon. Thanks for making us sound good. And to all of you who are listening, until next time, good night.
Thank you for watching this Come Reason video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more videos like these, consider subscribing to our Come Reason YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button. And you can follow us on social media. Lastly, if you'd like to help keep these kinds of videos free, consider providing a donation by clicking on the donation button beside me. Thank you.